Hello everyone, thanks for coming to the WIS's Gender Pay Gap. My name is Megan Fredberg. I am the WIS president this year. Just kind of a brief history a little bit on the gender pay gap. 50 years ago, on June 10th, 1963, President John F. Kennedy signed the Equal Pay Act, which made it illegal for employers to pay women and men differently for the same type of work. During that time, every dollar that men made, women were being paid 59 cents. Compared with today, women are still making less. The statistic for the United States for today is 77 cents for every dollar the man makes. AAUW, which is American Association of University Women, has helped us with being able to put this on today. We are going to start by introducing all of our speakers.
Okay, so first up, here we've got Julie Burke-Bowen. She's the mayor of Hattiesburg, South Dakota, and the president of Virtuoso Incorporated, a project management and business consulting firm based in Sioux Falls. Burke-Bowen has over 18 years of IT healthcare consulting, having worked for both Dialect Health Consulting and Ernst & Young. After working with corporations such as UMPC in Pittsburgh, PA, and community psychiatric centers in Las Vegas, Nevada, she returned to her home state to work for Avera McKinnon. For the past 6 years, she's been engaged in project management and consulting services across several industries. She holds a Bachelor of Science from USD and an MBA from UNLV, and she's also earned her PNP. So we're very honored to have her here today.
Hello, my name is Jessica Simcox, and I'm here to introduce March Zilla. The majority of March Zilla's professional life has centered on data communications and computer technologies. She entered the technology field when she was 20 years old. March began working on Television and Satellite Corporation in retail sales and installation. March and her husband ran and started 4 businesses. 3 of them were in the science and technology fields, incorporating one as a female-owned business to be positioned to capture contracts that had preference for minority or female-owned status. This helped secure contracts from Telesat Canada. Their corporation, Zilla Consulting Group, became known for deployment of large projects with excellent success rate and customer satisfaction, especially in disaster recovery situations. They held contracts with Ford and GM, installing and moving their employee learning stations, which were satellite and phone-based, an old way of having VoIP. Marge is a certified Dell warranty engineer and traveled most of central Minnesota performing in-home computer repair for Dell customers. Marge is also an accomplished oil painter, which works across America and in Europe. She has volunteered as an adult leader in Boy Scouts of America, served on the boards of the Scouting Districts, and St. Cloud Cathedral High School. She is currently a subcontractor, the Community Relations Director for a landscape and nursery retail center called Shelley's Garden Country in Boulder, Colorado, presently creating a new branding and marketing program.
Hi, I'm Ducky Wolfel, and I'll be introducing Linda Hildy. She is a 1963 graduate of Dakota State University, but when she started taking classes here, it was known as General Beadle State College. She helped run the kilns at the university for a couple years doing pottery. After graduating with her teaching degree, she taught school in the old hospital building, which is now Heston Hall. Later, Linda taught at the Franklin School, then got a library science degree from Augustana, and became the high school librarian in Chester for many years until she quit to join her husband, Ed Hildy Gravel. Together, she and her husband also created the housing development Woodland Marina, Inc. on Lake Madison. About 25 years ago, she went to Pierre as a lobbyist and was appointed to the South Dakota Board of Minerals and Environment. She ended up on the Emergency Response Commission and went to Washington, D.C. to work on a nationwide committee to establish the rules and regulations for emergency response. Governor Mickelson wanted to abolish the Emergency Response Commission, but Linda lobbied to make it its own committee. She gave a speech to all the firefighter chiefs in South Dakota at their yearly meeting and got them all to come lobby for the Emergency Response Committee in Pierre. With their help, Linda was able to see that project passed. Linda has frequently been one of the few, if not the only, female on the boards and committees on which she serves. In her spare time, Linda enjoys making pottery, painting, writing, and making stained glass windows with her husband.
said before, my name is Megan, and I'll be introducing Dr. Jack Walters. Dr. Jack Walters teaches general statistics, human resource and international management, entrepreneurship, and organizational behavior at Dakota State University here and the university's MBA program in Sioux Falls. Jack's private sector experience includes being Senior Vice President for Marketing for Poe and Associates, Inc. After completing his master's and doctoral degrees, he served as the Director of Planning and Analysis as Campus Assistant Dean at the University of South Florida in Tampa and Lakeland. Jack's research interest focuses on professional ethics, human resource strategy, and technology adoption process in higher education and industry. He earned a Bachelor's of Science in Economics from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, a Master's in Management from the University of South Florida, and a Doctorate in Strategic Management from the University of Texas at Austin. Jack is married to Dr. Sudhir Kin and is an expert in comparative literature and the author of 12 books and hundreds of articles and essays. Sudhir is a native of Estonia and has a son, Soren, and a grandson, Martin, who live there. Jack has two daughters, Shelley and Jennifer, who live in New York State and Boston. Jack is also has a granddaughter and a grandson. In his spare time, Jack writes fiction, produces videos, and stays busy with the perpetual renovation of his and Sudhir's home in Madison. Jack's service activities include DSU's Research Committee, Institutional Review Board, Barrier-Free Learning Committee, and just concluded 7 years as an advisor to the DSU SIFE team. Jack served as a member of the DSU Presidential Search Committee, DSU's Marketing Task Force, and DSU Presidential Inauguration Committee, and currently serves as Interim Director of the Continuous Quality Improvement at DSU. Jack is a true believer in the power of a smart and hardworking young people to make America a better place to live, work, and play.
Hi, my name is Megan Pagola, and I'm here to introduce Cecilia Whitmire. Cecilia Whitmire is the Vice President for Academic Affairs here at Dakota State University. She has been a part of the institution since 1986, when she was hired as an assistant professor in marketing. In October 1998, she was asked to serve as an interim vice president for academic affairs and was named to the position in June 1999 after a national search. She is responsible for the academic integrity of the institution and for the resolution of conflicts involving academic areas. As VPAA, she supervises the deans and directors of the academic support areas. She also represents the institution on the System-Wide Academic Affairs Council.
Hi, my name is Sarah Clinworth, and I'm here to introduce Chantel Krebs, who is a Republican who was elected to serve District 10 in the State House in 2004. She was then elected to her current seat in the South Dakota Senate for District 10 in 2010. Chantel is the chairwoman for the Senate Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee and also serves on the Health and Transportation Committees. She was chairwoman of the House Transportation Committee in 2008 to 2010. She was a majority whip in the House and is currently a majority whip in the South Dakota Senate. Chantel lives with her husband Mitch on an acreage outside of Sioux Falls. She comes from 4 generations of farming in South Dakota, as well as business owners in trucking and dealerships. Chantel was previously employed in the healthcare industry. She owned and operated 2 retail stores in downtown Sioux Falls and now consults in the retail sector. Chantel Krebs graduated from Arlington High School in 1991 and has lived in South Dakota her entire life. Chantel graduated from Dakota State University with a business administration degree. Chantel has served on numerous boards and committees, including the Xcel Energy Advisory Board, DSU Foundation Board, the Southeast Council of Governments, Vice Chair of the State Republican Party, South Dakota Symphony Orchestra Board, past President of the American Business Women's Association, South Dakota Voices for Children, Southeastern Behavioral Health Festival of Trees co-chair, Multiple Sclerosis Society and Leadership of Sioux Falls. Krebs, also chairwoman of the First Lutheran Church Capital Campaign. Awards she has received include the FFA State Farmer Award, American Businesswomen's Association Woman of the Year, 2004 Southeastern Behavioral Health Donors of the Year, Dakota State University Distinguished Alumnus, 2011 Associated General Contractors Highway Champion, 2011 Association of Townships Friend of Local Government, the 2012 South Dakota Farmers Union Distinguished Legislative Leader, and the 2012 South Dakota State Fair Legislative Beef Showmanship. Krebs also has spoken at numerous events throughout the Midwest on various topics, including women in business, business startup, agricultural issues, and leadership development. Krebs also was elected in 2012 as a national delegate for the American Council of Young Political Leaders to China and Taiwan. Chantel particularly enjoys raising buffalo and horses, pheasant hunting, and playing the saxophone.
Thanks, ladies, for those introductions. As this is a panel, I'll start off asking a question. This panelists will then answer their opinions, facts, anything they choose, and then we'll actually pass the mic around to anyone else that has a question. So we'll start it off. Please introduce yourself before you ask your question. My question is, has any of you ever been affected by the gender pay gap? In business, work, anything?
I don't know that I've actually been affected. I mean, I probably have been affected, but I did have a manager tell me, my hiring manager tell me, that there was a gentleman that had applied for the job, and since he was the breadwinner, he would have gotten more than I did. He told me that.
I have older, maybe, than some of the panelists up here. So I've been out in the world of work for a very, very long time. I graduated from college in 1971, so you can do the math in your head and figure that out. I remember that when I interviewed for my very first job after graduation, it happened to be with, maybe I shouldn't even say that, it was a state agency. Maybe I should just leave it at that. It was a state agency, and I remember during the interview process, I could tell from the series of questions that I received that that there was probably going to be some gender bias, maybe not discrimination, maybe not pay, but definitely some gender bias in that agency. And since I had another job interview coming up, I said, you know, I don't think this is going to work for either you or for me, because I don't think we're a good fit. But it certainly occurred in the early 70s, it's occurred in the 80s, I imagine it still occurs today. I think it's less likely today than it was before, but I think it is still a situation, it's still an issue.
Thanks, Cecilia. You probably don't want to say anything bad about the current employer, huh? You know, being younger and maybe somewhat less experienced, so to speak, in the workforce, I don't think a lot of us really know if we have been not paid fairly. I think that's probably the bigger question is, do you know if you have been paid unfairly? And I guess that's what we're trying to talk about today, is how can you arm yourselves to make sure that that doesn't happen? And I'll go into more detail, but on a legal perspective, coming from the political arena, I'll just say in the political arena, pay scale is set, it's, you know, we're all paid the same in the state legislature, but where I see a gender biasness in the political world, there's an old boys network. And I'm sure Mayor down there can say the same thing. So that doesn't matter if it's in the pay world or in your workforce, but it can be in the arenas, meaning organizations, groups, or activities that you associate yourself with. There can be some biases. Now, I'm not just saying there's a gender bias in every situation, but I want to help you and arm yourselves to make sure that you know what your rights are, what your worth is, and one of the things that you can do, I think the best thing you can do, and it was just a recent article yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, especially your age group, now the millennials, because they're out in the workforce, are discussing what they pay or are paid with their colleagues. And so many of you may question, can you legally do that? And yes, you can. you can openly discuss with your colleagues what you're paid. Now, the question is, does the employer have a policy in their handbook that states clearly that you can't? So it always goes back to what we call the Bible in the handbook, or in the employee policy with your company. But and furthermore is your colleagues willing and open to? And it's a different generation, because that would have never been considered in something with Cecilia. I mean, she would have never thought that in that age, or with Linda. But in your age group, I'm not even prepared and would not even be willing to do that. But your age group, I guess it's more of an open idea and thought. So I want to start with that by saying it's something it's happening, and especially because of the new social media availabilities with information out there.
Just wanted to add a comment responding to what Ms. Burke-Bowen said. What that employer did is against the law. Then also tying into what Ms. Krebs said, the Lilly Ledbetter Act, we've got a number of students here from the Human Resources course, and they've been studying these things all semester. The Lilly Ledbetter Act, which was passed in early 2009, was directed at this exact issue of, do you know if you have been unfairly treated on pay for gender discrimination? And the act was passed in response to a Supreme Court decision, a very poor Supreme Court decision, which had held that a person only had a cause of action for pay discrimination for 6 months after it occurred. Well, Lilly Ledbetter had been underpaid in comparison to her male colleagues who had exactly the same duties in violation of the Equal Pay Act from 1963 for 17 years. So she was deprived of compensation for those 16 and a half of those 17 years. And so the law was passed to say that each new paycheck you get reopens a window of on the statute of limitations regarding these kinds of claims.
My question is not necessarily just pay-wise, but what have you experienced as far as gender inequality, gender bias in your jobs and your lives, in maybe your children's lives or friends or anything like that?
Addressing some of the theme of you might be paid the same, well, what are you dealing with in the environment that you're working with? As a female owner of a technical installation company, I brought my staff to Florida to be trained on some technical equipment. And just how we were sitting in the room, the teacher assumed this was a mom and pop shop, and there's your little girl in front of a room of technicians from all over America. Now, there's a couple ways to address that. Understanding that this is a man in front of the room that needs to maintain the control of the room for the rest of the week, is interested in his esteem, that he made a very obvious mistake in that comment. I quietly just said, no, I am the owner and this is my staff. But I had to reestablish and remove that bias. And maybe it was nice we just cleared the air right away, because the rest of the day is, who are these two girls and the guy? And to reestablish that very professionally. So that was one experience that I had to deal with.
I taught school for quite a while, and I did find it interesting that the men who taught classes were paid much more than those of us who did not work with football and things like that. At the same time, I was expected to do other tasks on behalf of, I would have to organize the books and work with certain students on special projects, and yet my pay never reflected that. And I always kind of wondered how they justified the amount of time that I spent with students. you didn't receive anything extra over it, and yet every single sport event they were very well paid for. And I have to say I did kind of resent that over the years.
Just one thing to add to what was said there. A woman on my dissertation committee when I was in graduate school was an expert in gender discrimination. And just as a side note, just in the last few days of news, she will be the incoming dean of the University of Michigan School of Business sometime in the near future. But in her dissertation, she studied the arc of time over two professions. One was teaching, and the other one was telephone operators. And what she found was at the beginning of the 20th century, most of those jobs were held by men. And over the 20th century, as we all know, most of those jobs ended up being held by women. And as the job changed from being male-dominated to female-dominated, the prevailing wage in the profession went down. This is the strongest proof of gender discrimination you can have. This is not saying on a snapshot-by-snapshot basis, as we have here, where one male was paid more and a female was paid less. They're saying that as the profession became female, it became paid less. It's a very profound finding in research.
I do a lot of work in government, and one of the things I was very happy to find is that government itself seems to be an equality industry. When I first went to here, there simply were not many women on staff. Today, there are probably as many women as men working on staff out in the field, accomplishing things that we need to have done for our state. And in Washington, D.C., I find the same thing. There's much more equality in the work that's done there between the genders than there is if you're working in an industry outside of a government entity.
Talking about our generation and how we're more open to discussing our compensation with our colleagues, do you kind of see it as maybe speeding up the process, kind of equal out the pay gap, or?
In response to your question, yes, that was a part of the Wall Street Journal article yesterday, was that they feel that that's one of the forces that will come together. And when we talk about what you can do, one of the things they say, and I wanted to tell you, was to join forces. So making sure that your colleagues are open to that discussion first, being very careful on how you approach it. Because if you're going to ask somebody probably my age or Cecilia's age in the workforce that you may work with, you have to be very careful because they probably won't be very willing to share that with. So, knowing your audience, knowing the people that might be willing to participate. When I say joining forces, I'm going to extend that beyond, is that because of the social media, it's on Facebook maybe that people are posting this, or you can go out there and search and research your data. There's plenty of books being written on that. Obviously, Dr. Walters knows probably more about that as far as resources provided that you could utilize. But in general, all I can say to encourage all of you, not just the females in the audience, is to get involved with organizations and associations. And where and how does that help you? Is because it's called networking. I felt that for me, at the age of 30, being first elected, and now I've served almost 10 years, the reason I was probably elected at such a young age is because I was involved at a very young age, even starting in college, by attending and being involved in associations. So, Association of University Women, American Business Women's Association, BPW, Business and Professional Women's Association. Your trade specialty has associations and groups. Join them, go, network, share your business cards at all times. You just never know when you're going to need that person for and as a resource. But then that also would be able to open up your conversations. The Sioux Falls Chamber of Commerce has a new group called YPN, Young Professionals Network. And it's for those that are in the business and professional world in Sioux Falls under the age of 40. And so we're banned from that group if you're over 40, but it provides an opportunity, an avenue for folks your age to network, finding new jobs, having these discussions. So these are all things when I think the 3 key areas, and I'll talk about other 2 maybe later, but the 3rd area is to join forces. So your voice will be heard, you're on the same message, and that you're all educated, but you're networking and getting involved in organizations to also help you in your field. Because the more valuable you are in your company, because you are a part of these groups and associations, the more likely you're going to get paid better.
I read an article just recently, knowing I was going to be on this panel, so I thought I should do a little reading. I read an article recently that said if the gender pay gap continues to close at the rate that it's currently closing, it will take 50 years for there to be equality in the pay. So the change is very, very slow, very incremental, and if we just allow it to continue to roll along the way it is, then there won't be gender equity for a very long time. So I think some of the recommendations or suggestions you're getting here today will help close that gap more quickly.
And going a little further on that, I did what Dr. Whitmire did. I was reading some things, and my interest is in the societal impact. Too often, in my opinion, the issue is portrayed as, well, this is unfair to women. And of course, the impact of it is unfair to everyone. Okay, are you married to a woman? Was a woman your mother? Do you have a daughter? All of those people are affected. And one of the articles said that were the gender pay gap fixed, it would add 500,000 to 1 million jobs to the economy. That's equal to or greater than the stimulus bill that was put in effect several years ago in response to the financial crisis. It's an enormous impact for a college-educated woman. All you college-educated women sitting out there, the difference in pay due to the gender pay gap over a lifetime is $1 million.
I was going to get on my equal soapbox. I think, at least when I was in college, and even when I was working on my master's degree, college women said, well, I will probably work for 2 or 3 or 4 years, and then I will marry, and I will have children, and I'll come out of the workforce, and maybe, or maybe not, ever go back into it. And I'm here to tell you that women in the audience, you will be in the workforce for 40 years. You might as well plan on being there and doing whatever you can to make sure that you're treated fairly in the workforce, because it is not a matter of you working for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 years and leaving the workforce. That is the far exception today rather than the rule. So you really do need to be, and not just the women in the room, the men also, because as Jack said, you're probably likely to be married to one and have a daughter, whatever, that you do need to be concerned about it. I think the article I read said something like $11,000 a year pay differential if you've been discriminated against. That's the average. You think about what $11,000, the difference that would make in a household income, and what that would allow you to buy. So it isn't just a matter of the woman, it's the family that is affected. And I think they said, on average, $400,000 over your lifetime, up to $1 million. So it has a long-term impact. Think about what that money would buy as far as lifestyle. Huge impact.
Some of those statistics will drive you nuts. Now here's a piece of sort of good news. It's not good news, but you'll see where I'm going with it. For people coming out of college now, the difference in pay between men and women is that women are paid only 5% less. Now that's still wrong, but 5% is not 23%. But 10 years out, this is college-educated people, 10 years out, women are now paid 12% less. So the problem gets worse as it goes along. Then there's some new research that is quite amazing, but this is just how it falls out scientifically. In the 10 years out of college, the bigger differential in pay is between women who have children and women who don't have children. There's a bigger difference in pay. Women with children are paid less. than women who don't have children than there is between the pay of men and women. So you see how the system ends up penalizing women for being the ones who bear children, for example, and that's not a choice. There's no option on that. We don't have a, hey, the man will do it. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that has to be fixed.
Hi, my name is Xing Yi, and I'm made in China, and it's really interesting to be here. So I was thinking, if one day, if we don't talk about this, then it might not be a problem anymore if we don't talk about gender gap or anything like that. So my question is, for your business organization, how do you work on this? Like, you know, how do you deal with people who come in here and you will enforce that to your business organization? And also, do you have any recommendations for, you know, just us getting out of college? I mean, if we go apply for a job, we can't just say, hey, you can't treat me different, you know. You can think about it.
I will answer the second part to your question because I want to leave you today with tidbits of advice more than focusing on maybe topics of what we've experienced. Is for a woman, never accept the first offer. Rule number one, women always accept the first offer because we're so nice and we don't want to be offended and we just, you know, the guy makes the offer and, oh, it's perfect, it's great, because we don't want it to stand up. Or we don't like confrontation, and we may feel that's a confrontational moment when we don't accept that first offer. So that's the part, is knowing your worth, where I was going to share with you a couple of tidbits, is knowing what you're worth. So making sure you do your research and what others are paid in that type of similar job situation. Bringing value to the table. So don't just come to the job and expect to get paid more if you're going to be 8 to 5 and check out. What do you bring to the table as far as thoughts and opinions? Are you a part of associations and groups? Are you a member of something that's going to expand your knowledge in your field? Are you networking? Are you taking self-improvement classes or educational curricular activities that further your improvement in your field? But the bottom line for women is we accept our first offer, and so negotiating the pay is where I'm going with that. Women typically over men always accept the first offer. So women, don't accept your first offer. Counter offer, because they most likely will come back with another counter offer. May not be to where you want to be, but somewhere in the middle. And then making sure you have the negotiation practices. And it takes practice. So I suggest, and Megan, I don't know if you remember when I was at my presentation where we met in Sioux Falls, is how a woman stands, how she sits, how she presents herself. Because body language, as UCLA, this research is showing, 93% of your delivery is in your body language and the tone of your voice. 7% is your content. So how you respond to them, how you stand, how you sit, and how you own the room when you're in that room negotiating.
I was also going to say that you might want to follow your instincts when you interview. If there's a tension in the room, if you're not comfortable with the person, if it's and I hate to say this, but if it's an older man, you may want to think about another option.
This brings back memories of my first job of teaching after I graduated from school. And I was hired by the Madison school system to teach. And I went in for an interview, and they decided they called to tell me that yes, indeed, they wanted to hire me. They told me what they were paying me, and it never occurred to me to ask for a higher amount. I was so naive. I knew absolutely nothing about how to do a job interview. But I just assumed you would go through school and then you would get a job. And I got the job, but I sure could have used more money.
I'd like to second Senator's comment about negotiating, knowing your worth, knowing your value, what you're bringing to the table. It may be equal or better than your competitors, either female or male. But to have that confidence to present yourself as a strong, viable candidate in that employment field. And with the capabilities, if you can demonstrate them, we had a very difficult technical field. And could I physically do the same work as the men counterparts and on installations, which were civil works in difficult environments and in critical environments? And as long as I could do that, I could negotiate that same rate. We were contractors and we were the owners of the company. And so when we contracted, it was for all of us. It wasn't men or women. And then when we paid our staff, it did not matter if you could do the job, that was the rate. So we tried to keep that very much with, if your skills can bring us that production that we contracted for, that we put our names on as an employer, you were paid that same work, that same rate.
And I'd like to address the first part of your question, which actually I just had this conversation with someone, and it really, as she was mentioning, it's little tiny steps, and it's a lot about education. I had a discussion, someone said to me, you're a mom, you're a business owner, you're a mayor, how do you do it? And I said, have you ever asked a man that? Have you ever said to a man, you travel, you have a business, you have a family, how do you do that? It's just an assumption. And so little bits of kind of bringing that to light and bringing that attention to the cause, it's just little steps.
Anyone else have a question?
Hi, I'm Jimmy Chatton, and I would ask if, as a producer, a manager, somebody in the middle tier of the organization that you may be working in, if you observe a pay gap, an unfair pay gap either between male or female, how would you go about approaching both them, the person that's being treated unfairly, and the higher-ups, those that originally made that situation possible?
Well, I could say that I hope that I treat faculty fairly. You're supposed to say yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. But part of my position is setting the pay scale or the pay range when we make offers to faculty. And I think I can honestly say that I've never looked at that pay scale and say, oh, but the top candidate is a woman or the top candidate is a man. I might be reverse discrimination. I try to put that out of my head and say, this is the pay scale. We use a national survey. It's published by Oklahoma State. It's by discipline, by faculty rank, and we use that pay scale as kind of gives us an average, and that's what we use if we don't think about gender. We look at qualifications of the candidate. So I think at least I think I can say here that there is no pay discrimination based on gender. I think most of higher ed probably is that way, although you do have to understand that there are some academic disciplines paid much lower than others. And unfortunately, on an average, nationally, those are probably disciplines where there are more women than there are men.
Going to Jimmy's question about how to solve it, it's both a simple process and a very complicated process. It has to do with valuing jobs for what they contribute to the organization without regard to who holds the job and all that kind of stuff. So if you have a value for the job and you have those on some kind of a scale from least valuable to most valuable for whatever the organization is doing, then you plot that on a graph with how much the people are paid. It should be some kind of a straight line that tilts up, right? Because as the contribution of the job to the organization goes up, the compensation of the job should go up equally. Of course, what you find in real organizations, we were just talking about this in a class a couple of weeks ago, is you put the dots and it looks like the graph has the measles because the dots are all over the chart, not on a line. The ones above the line means the people are overpaid, and the ones below the line means they're underpaid. And so the first thing you do is you make something like that. Then you go to the higher-ups and you say, we need to get these people, I didn't just say women, these people who aren't compensated properly for what they're doing up to the line. And then we're going to have to slow down the rate of pay increase for the ones above the line so that they come back to being equal. That's a huge job. A lot of managers don't want to get into it because it's time consuming, but if you don't do it, you leave in place a fundamental unfairness.
Taking one step further, Jimmy, I think your human resources office and woman or male or female that runs that office would be the person to go to as well to bring that. You said, what could you do specifically? Jack is definitely doing the statistics side of it. That's going to take a lot of work, and maybe you can't even do that because it's how do you start or where do you start or what would you do? But to take it one step further, I think going to your human resources department, because that's the department that should be notified of a concern. But one step further for those that are employed there, or you as future employees, this is my other tidbit. Keep your records. Keep all of your records. Keep your performance evaluations, keep your memorandums, your emails, your phone calls, the notes, the conversations, especially if they're uncomfortable or unusual ones that can precipitate a concern of discrimination in pay. Performance evaluations are probably one of the areas that can give you some leverage legally in terms of being able to say I was underpaid or overpaid, or when they say wage gap concerns, there's one area of that. Just because performance evaluations are done by managers and they can be subjective, and sometimes they don't like to put down the true nitty-gritty. They just may say good or great, but we call them SOBs. When I talk about performance evaluations, make sure that you're writing down specific observed behaviors. So if you're a manager, what is Cecilia doing specifically? Is she doing the widget collecting good or poor? Is her numbers better or worse from her previous quarter? Specific observed behaviors will give you some guidance for that pay scale then to go and evaluate even further of a pay raise or a not of a pay raise. But for you as an employee, keeping those records so that you have some data to be able to take that if you need to, whether it be a letter to the EEOC, if you feel you're being discriminated, or to the Human Resources Department yourself. You as an employee can go directly to the HR department and ask that question.
So I wanted to steer the crowd a little bit. So everything so far is, yes, there is a gender pay gap, and women are being paid less for the same task, the same responsibilities. But aren't we whining a little bit too much? Aren't we being compensated, not in terms of money, but other benefits which we get from the job? So if I'm employed by a certain business and I'm expecting a baby and I deliver the baby, there is a maternity leave. I'm still being paid for it, at least at some level. I don't work, I can take care of my child. So all those benefits which are not exactly directly translated to money right away, we don't see it. So isn't there sort of a whining kind of approach from female that, oh yes, we are weaker, oh yes, we don't have negotiation skills, yes, we don't have a way of saying no to a guy boss. Is there the other side?
So much to what we've been talking about. You're talking about larger industry, someone that you go to work for. Nobody's touched on the basis of the fact that you can set up your own business and go to work, run it exactly as you wish, and pay yourself what you can afford. And I've had both experiences. I taught, was a librarian, and then my husband said he needed help with the business. So I began to run a gravel pit. I began to deal with hiring and firing. I began to deal with people who did not want to deal with a woman. They wanted to talk to a man. And there's a whole different world out there for those of you who might be interested in running your own business. You make your own rules, and you have to abide by your successes and failures, and you always have some of each. It doesn't have to be a big industry. Ours was a fairly small industry. We happened to be mining the shoreline of Lake Madison, so I opened a second business, which is called real estate, and went into the business of selling property. Whatever business you're in, you might find there's something else that you can branch off to, and you may end up hiring people, in which case you're in the position of determining what are you going to pay them, what do you need for insurance. There's a whole world out there if you want to run your own business. You don't have to be part of a huge company where you're a little tiny piece of it and they're not treating you fairly. Keep that as an option.
I thought, Barbara, I would address your question directly. I thought this was kind of an interesting quote. It said that women business owners make less than half of what male business owners make, which, since they have no boss, seems that it must be independent of discrimination. The reason for the disparity, and I'm quoting from an article, the reason for the disparity, according to the Rochester Institute of Technology study, is that money is a primary motivator for 76% of men versus only 29% of women. Women place a higher premium on shorter work weeks, proximity to home, fulfillment, autonomy, and safety. So that's kind of an interesting idea. Here's another one. It said this study leads to the unambiguous conclusion that the difference in the compensation of men and women are a result of a myriad of factors, and that the raw wage gap should not be used as a basis to justify corrective action. Indeed, there may be nothing to correct. The difference in raw wages may be almost entirely the result of the individual choices being made by both men and women workers. I don't know that I necessarily believe that, but that is certainly a point of view in the marketplace, is that it's the result of choices that women make. We go into careers that are perhaps not as well paid as others. We choose, sometimes we say, well, rather than taking that promotion which will require me to travel 3 weeks out of the month, I'm going to choose to stay in the job that I currently have, or I'm going to choose a different position. And there probably is some of that. But I think you have to also understand the dynamics of the family and the home that is encouraging the woman to make those choices. Going back to the man saying, well, it's more important for me to get a better job, so you need to stay home more. I don't know.
I want to address Dr. Zerbinska's question directly. No. Women are not whining too much. Here's what the science says about the issues that Dr. Whitmire raised. It is true that there are life choices, there is the issue of bearing children, and then there's the separate thing that we talked about, that some professions are paid less, some disciplines are paid less in universities and so forth. When you put all of that into a large-scale equation, what they find is that 40% of the gender pay gap is due directly to gender discrimination. So sure, some of those things do matter, but to say that we can explain all of the difference by choices that women make, for example, is not true. And so I think, personal opinion, I don't have the statistics on this one, is that some part of the difference in women business owners' income is also gender discrimination. We have laws in court cases that dealt with racial business owner discrimination back in the 1970s, but we don't have as many well-known cases dealing with gender business owner discrimination. So being activist about all of these issues is the right way to be, and being not activist is not going to solve the problem.
Besides speaking up for yourself and knowing your value, there are programs in place that we took advantage as a business, was to incorporate as a woman-based entity. There are programs, some more international than American, but in America also, where preference is to, and especially government, women-owned, non-traditional businesses or minority-owned. And we positioned ourselves to take advantage of that offering to help leapfrog into the market. We were a husband and wife team, but we incorporated where I was the majority stockholder. That's all that's needed to happen to become a woman-based entity. And you can access programs that preference is given for that. But I would add, in using that, don't abuse that. That when you as a woman step forward, take that opportunity, that no one regrets putting that out there. That you provide the best service, the better service, beyond the service that anyone imagined. If you're going to enter a market that has, in different levels, biases against you, that if you correct that attitude with professionalism and wisdom and integrity and smart business, that will go a long way in changing attitudes.
It is now 1 o'clock, but we have one last question, quick.
Hi, my name is Andrew, and last question, I was just wondering if you see a day where there's total gender equality in the workplace.
I always also have the same question if I will see the completion of Crazy Horse. Crazy Horse. Inside joke for the South Dakotans that I visited Crazy Horse Monument in western South Dakota. I don't know. I'll be honest with you. At the rate that it's currently going, if you look at statistics that we've all talked about, specifically our professors here, I don't see that happening just based on statistical data. But this is why we have these forums, and this is why you guys are going out armed. Take this information to heart. Take it very seriously, what we've said. Be active in your community. Be active in your job. Don't sit back, because guess what? The person next to you is going to get the better job and the more pay because they were more active. So you can't expect it to come to you. You have to go out and work for it as well. And when I say work for it, it's talking about all of these things. Networking, keeping your records, making sure that you're doing self-improvement or skill-based learning for your career, saying no, learning how to negotiate, knowing how to enter the room, how to hold the upper hand in the room when you're talking and having conversations, knowing your worth. Those are all things that we've shared today, that this is going to make you a more educated employee for your future. So probably not is the short answer.
I was also going to say that it is important that as you go out, marry, have families, that you raise your daughters to understand their value and their worth in the workplace. I think that's a big deal. I think it will take maybe another generation, maybe that 50 years, maybe less than that, but it really is a matter of educating young women to their value and encouraging them to go out and get educated and get over-educated if that's what it takes, and to make some of those hard decisions and put themselves in stressful work environments and that sort of thing, because that's how you grow and that's how you get compensated.
I believe that there is room for additional federal legislation on these issues. There have been laws proposed in Congress during the last couple of years. They have not passed as yet. The most recent one deals with an issue that Ms. Krebs raised earlier, that many companies still have policies that forbid you to discuss your pay with your coworkers. In 1992, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission ruled that that is not legal, but it's not a law. So companies continue to do it and continue to pressure employees that what they're doing is wrong. This proposed law would have specifically outlawed forbidding your employees to discuss their pay. The other thing is that legislation can push down the path the idea that jobs that women hold are worth less to society than jobs typically held by men. Here's my favorite example. Jobs taking care of small wild animals, like in zoos, are more held by men than women. There's a balance, but there's more held by men than women. Jobs taking care of little human beings are by far held more by women than men. zookeepers are paid more than daycare workers. Why? I just think it's part of a very long arc of historical patterns that we as a society have to turn against.
I appreciated your comments about women, but at the same time, if we aren't just raising women, we're also raising men. And if we really want to have an impact on the world, get the boys to understand how important it is that they are able to work on an even basis with women, that they can communicate with them, that they're comfortable with them. There's too many times you run into these guys that are macho. I don't think their mothers taught them a thing. And I've seen it over and over again. They spend time trying to get the girls to learn how to go out and get a job and manage, but they're not teaching the guys that are maybe going to be hiring the girls that they should give them the same respect. And I do think that sometimes society itself is screwed up in this way.
I would just like to add a short comment. The company my husband works for presently is from Finland, and that is one of very progressive countries. So it is doable. In Finland, if you have a baby, mom and dad, either parent, may take with full pay, like a 12-month paternity leave paid. So they value the children and they value the spouses. So it is able to bring about.
I guess I get the last word. But again, to your question, I don't know. I don't know. Not everything is not equal at this point. But I would like to think that we can do it. And just as she said as well, when you're making those hiring decisions, because you'll be in management as you progress through your careers, remember these conversations. And remember that you have the authority and the ability to make it right. Again, education.
That concludes our panel discussion today. I'd like to thank everybody for coming and thank every one of our speakers, as well as AAUW for sponsoring this for us today.